What's up guys, we're going to be installing Visual Studio Code on BlackArch. We're going to deliberately run into a few problems along the way to simulate a basic installation flow. So let's start by logging in. We're going to log in as root, default password BlackArch. We'll start by firing up a terminal. Now the obvious thing to do at this stage is to run the installation command for installing Visual Studio Code, which is going to be pacman-s code. This will work. You will have an installed version of Visual Studio Code after this, but it's important to keep in mind that there are different versions of Studio Code. And the problem I ran into here is there are certain extensions for Visual Studio Code which I use on a regular basis. For example, remote SSH. It's a very important extension for me. And upon installing this version of Visual Studio Code, I couldn't actually find that extension. Now it turns out that the reason for that is that it's a Microsoft provided extension. And in order to be able to access those specific Microsoft extensions, we have to install the correct version of Visual Studio Code. So let's run a quick Google search for Visual Studio Code. I'm specifically going to check in the Arch Linux user repository. So we're going to take this first link, AUR Visual Studio Code bin. And if we just scroll down, there's an interesting comment here, frequently asked questions. What is the difference between this package and the one in the community repo? This is the official binary distribution from Microsoft. The one in the community repo is an unofficial build made from source. Beyond the license differencing and branding, there are some proprietary features not available in the open source version, such as extensions made available by Microsoft. So we're going to git clone this repo. First of all, I'm going to cd into the op directory, which is where we can install user packages on Linux, or at least it's one location. And we are going to run the command git clone. And notice we have this git clone URL here. So it's https://aur.archlinux.org/Visual Studio Code bin.git. So let's run that. And let's have a look at our newly created directory, which we're going to cd into Visual Studio Code bin. Let's have a look at the contents of that. Notice we have this package build file here. This means we can build the package with the command make package. And we're going to use a -i for install. Now we said we're going to deliberately run into some errors. So here's our first error. Running make packages root is not allowed, as it can cause permanent, catastrophic damage to your system. All right, so we're simply going to log in as a user. So we're going to use the command su for switch user. Regular user account, so it's going to be called something different in your case, whatever the user account is that you have set up. If you don't have one set up, you're going to have to set one up with the user add command. So now we're with a regular user account, and we can try the same command again, which is going to be make package -i. And it's telling us we don't have write permission for the directory op to Visual Studio bin. Okay, that's fine. Let's check out the permissions for this directory. So we are in Visual Studio bin at the moment. Let's come out of that. Let's have a look at the permissions for this directory. So Visual Studio Code bin, we can see that the owner is root and the group is root. In fact, what we're going to do is just change the owner to Zenshell, because essentially we can see that the owner has read, write, and execute permissions on this directory. So we're going to run a sudo chown. I'm going to set the new owner of that file, or folder in this case, as Zenshell. And we need to tag on a -r because this is going to be a recursive command since it's running through a folder. We then need to specify the directory name, which is going to be Visual Studio Code bin / in this case. And we need to enter the password for our user account. I believe that's the wrong password. Let's try BlackArch. Okay, let's try again. So hopefully that was the right password. Let's check out our directory Visual Studio Code bin. You can see it's now owned by Zenshell. So let's now cd back into Visual Studio Code bin folder. And let's once again run the make package install command. This time it appears to be doing something, which is great. So it's giving us a bit of information about the package. It's telling us total installed size is going to be 274.91 megabytes. Proceed with installation. We're okay with that. We're just going to proceed. Now, since we use the -i, I believe it will already put the package into our path. So if we actually just leave this directory and use the code command, we see it's responding to something, but nothing's happening. So we're obviously running into an error. For some reason, it's just not launching. Now we can get a bit more information about this error if we go into cd opt, and let's have a look at our newly created package. You can see we've got Visual Studio Code bin. That was what we cloned from the Git repo. And we have this Visual Studio Code folder as well, where we're going to find our newly installed package. Let's go into that bin directory where we're going to find the binary, and you can see it here, and let's try and run it directly from this directory. So we actually just got nothing back there. We've cd'd up one directory. Let's try and run the file in this directory. What we really need is some kind of error message so we have an idea of what's going on here. And when we run it from this location, we get this error message, authorization required, but no authorization protocol specified, unable to open XDisplay. Now we know XDisplay has to do with Windows, essentially. It's the visual window manager that we have for Linux. And that makes sense. We need a window for Visual Studio Code, and it's basically saying can't open the window. And it's referring to this authorization required, but no authorization protocol specified. Now this feels like a little bit of an obscure error. What's happening here is that the X server, or the X display, it needs a configuration file. And essentially there is no configuration for the X display on the root account. Now you might think for a minute, hold on, we're not logged into the root account, we're logged into a user account. So why is it checking the root account for the X server configuration file? Doesn't seem to make sense. And the answer is simply because we logged in as root initially. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to log out, and rather than log in as root, we're going to log in directly as our user. Let's fire up the terminal, and let's just see what happens if we try and launch everything from any directory, because code is in the path clearly. And boom, there we go. So we can see that the user account does have the appropriate configuration for starting the X display, but it seems BlackArch is only going to look at that configuration if we actually log in as a regular user. If we log in as the root account and then SU over to one of the users, it's checking the root account for the X display configuration and it's not finding it there. So another solution to this problem would be that you could head over to the root account and set up the X server configuration correctly over on that side of things. But as you can see, we don't really need to do that. If we are logged in as a regular user, which is realistically probably a best practice anyway, rather than always logging in as the root account, this is actually more secure to log in as a regular user and then use the sudo command if we need some sort of privilege escalation. So you can see if we log in as a regular user, everything works fine. This is going to be the official Microsoft distribution. So if we just head over to the extensions, one of the extensions that I always use on a regular basis is this remote SSH. As you can see, open any folder on a remote machine using SSH and take advantage of VS Code's full feature set. So essentially it allows us to browse a file system on a remote computer and essentially use Visual Studio Code in the same way as if that file directory was available on our local system. As you can see here, it's a Microsoft package. So if you just run the regular pacman-s code command to pull in the open source version of code, you are not going to have access to any of these extensions that are from Microsoft.